The Prime Minister says Labour MPs must make up their own minds on whether they'll vote in favour of making assisted dying legal. Details of the proposed law have been revealed and it's due to have its first debate by MPs later this month. Well, I'm joined by author Paul Carroll. Really good to talk to you, Paul, because you were one of those who were in favour of assisted dying originally and you've changed your mind. Why? Talk us through that journey for you.
A number of reasons, really. Yes, I was in favour. In fact, signed up for Dignitas a few years ago, but then went through 3 very close family deaths, which gave me cause for pause. Then I was quite influenced by the COVID pandemic, when one saw what happened in terms of, particularly how the elderly were perhaps marginalised or not considered as important as economic factors to be protected. And at that time, I thought it would be interesting to write a book about the journeys that people who embarked on an assisted dying route would undertake. So I basically conceived a book which followed 4 individuals who had basically signed up for an assisted death. We're exploring the reasons, the process, the influence on them from the families and from other external factors. And that became Shaking Hands with Elvis, which in a satirical black comedy way looked at a very serious subject of assisted dying. But as many readers have said, brought home the reality of it and made the reader think, hang on, if I was in this position, what would my choice be? So it's a different alternative to, shall we say, a legal and a technical argument, which is, I've been looking at the paper today, which is very, very extensive. MPs are going to have their work cut out to absorb all this information and look at what's happening around the world before they make their minds up on this ruling.
But what are your main concerns, as somebody who had considered going to Dignitas and taking control of what happens at the end of your life? What are your concerns about this particular bill?
I think I'm looking at international precedents, and this was quite alarming when I did in-depth research into the book. So there's all sorts of models thrown around. The UK wants to follow the Oregon model. I looked at the Netherlands, I looked at Belgium, I looked at Canada in particular. And the first thing is, the most striking thing about the bill that's going before Parliament on the 29th of November is this absolute cast iron, strict guidelines that it's only for people who've got less than 6 months to live, terminally ill, 2 doctors, High Court ruling. That's all very well. The Canadian model started like that. And it was soon challenged legally to encompass people who were suffering chronic pain and hardship. That's subsequently been challenged again to include people with mental issues or problems. And this is what led me to change my mind, because I thought that what's going to happen is that whatever ruling goes through, it's just going to be challenged by the next group of people who say, we have an equal right to die as you do. And already there is a complete split between people who are pro-assisted dying, who I've been following for a number of years. So they won't agree with the bill, because a number of people who are in favour of assisted dying will say that, hang on, this 6 months terminal diagnosis doesn't include us, because I've got a neurological or a mental issue. But my needs and my rights to die, if I choose to do so, are the same as the people who may be included in this bill on its first reading, until it's legally challenged, of course.
So it's the slippery slope element of it that concerns you, that you think that once this is enshrined in law, it will then become expanded further and further.
Yes, it's called the slippery slope, and that in a way sort of masks the detail, because what I would like Parliament to look at in this debate, and I'm sure they will, is how many deaths are we actually talking about a year, an assisted death? In Canada at the moment, and remember the bill only came in 2016, 4% of deaths in that country are now assisted deaths. And they are looking at reducing weakening the parameters again to include people who have mental problems, and they will qualify, and that could double again. And not only that, it's growing exponentially. And then you put it in hard numbers. That's actually 28,000 deaths a year in Canada. So if we applied that to the UK population, you could say that if this bill was introduced, maybe in 10 years' time, we're going to be looking at 50,000 deaths a year. Is that acceptable? Is that what we want as a society? Because I think as soon as you desensitize people to an artificial ending of life, it brings all sorts of other people into play, whether they can't receive healthcare, whether they're just poor, whether they've had enough of life, whether they feel they're a burden on the family. So as soon as you've desensitized this issue of it's okay to have an assisted death, then I think this is when it becomes very, very worrying. And again, in shaking hands with Elvis, I dealt with that. In fact, in that scenario where the NHS has disappeared and the government have brought in assisted dying, it suits the government to actually persuade people to take an early exit because it reduces the burden on the state in terms of health and healthcare and wealth and mental welfare. So that's a sort of a satirical view of it. But this could be the direction of travel. And whilst the rules and regulations outlined in the current paper, which I've had a chance to look at it in detail today, are very, very strict in terms of what they promise, I would like to know, well, how can they promise it? Because the very campaigners who are applying to change the law now might be successful, but who's going to then challenge the law next year and the law the year after that, as we've seen in other countries?
Paul Carroll, we will leave it there. Author talking about assisted dying. Very good to get your thoughts this afternoon. Thank you very much. Let's get a look at the weather now.